bueno y qué lindo tenerlos hoy aquí en esta noche tan bonita del otoño. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jomaira. Yo siempre soy de esta, como que the podium is here, pero yo me paro con el microphone and then it makes the media team very upset. So déjame act like I know and let me stop trying to be inside the microphone. Okay. My name is Jomaira Figueroa Vasquez, and I am the director of CENTRO, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies here at Hunter College. It is such an honor to have you all here tonight, and especially with our special guest for this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about Frank Espada, talk a little bit about the exhibition that we have here, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists. You all should have a program, or if there was a program available, there's more around. My introduction will be followed by Martin Espada doing a reading, then David Gonzalez doing a reading, and then a panel conversation with both Martin, David, Máximo Colón, and Erika P. I'm really excited. So I'll talk to you a little bit about this, and one of the things that I want to open up by saying is that CENTRO is in year 2 of a 5-year project called Rooted and Relational. It is part of our collective vision for CENTRO, thinking about the ways that we are so deeply rooted in Puerto Rican and Nuyorican history, but also deeply related to the Puerto Rican diaspora across the world, not just in the United States. And also thinking about our connection to other groups, other forms of relationships, political coalition, consciousness building, our ethical, our social and economic collaborations and connections with one another. And so this year, the theme for CENTRO is Boricuas in Relation, where we're taking up the question of Puerto Rican history and Puerto Rican lived experiences alongside the lived experiences of other folks, not just other Puerto Ricans, but other groups of people. So for example, Puerto Ricans in Hawaii, Puerto Ricans and Puerto Rico and Palestine, Puerto Rico in terms of thinking about photography, arts, theater, thinking about Puerto Rican data, Puerto Rican sovereignty in relation to the other territories. So this entire year, a group of 13 researchers, as well as the rest of the CENTRO team of 92 people, are working tirelessly on producing accessible and actionable research in Puerto Rican studies that contends with the question of Boricuas in relation. We're not only thinking about that because we obviously know we're living in a time of rising fascism and political turmoil, and so CENTRO is also leaving space to also contend with and be responsive to this political climate, which also has so much to do with Boricuas in relation and what it means for us as people who have citizenship, though vexed and second class, what we have to do in terms of a solidarity with others. And I think there's no better example for us this evening than the life and legacy of Frank Espada, someone who was a tried and true community activist, organizer, and artist. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Frank Espada. Francisco Luis Espada Roy, known professionally as Frank Espada and colloquially as Tato, was born in Utuado, Puerto Rico on December 21st, 1930. In 1939, his family moved to New York City for reasons unknown to young Frank. He briefly attended City College before joining the Air Force in 1949, and he served in the Korean War. This was a decision that he regretted for the rest of his life. He married his wife Marilyn in 1952, and together they had 3 children, Martin, Jason, and Lisa. Through the support of the GI Bill, Espada attended the New York Institute of Photography, and there he fell in love with documentary photography. He was mentored by senior photographers Eugene Smith and David Heath, who remained important interlocutors for Espada throughout his career. While photography was Frank's passion, he went on to work as an electrical contractor to support his young family. In 1967, he decided to become a community organizer for the Puerto Rican Community Development Project, where he became involved in a series of community-based action projects and support networks for New York City's most vulnerable populations. He also founded ENIA, the East New York Action Group, fighting gentrification in East New York. It was his work as an activist and organizer alongside his passion for documentary photography, education, and community activism which helped shape Espada's desire to illuminate unseen and misunderstood dimensions of the quotidian lives of racialized, impoverished, and oppressed populations. Sadly, he felt that he had lost his most creative years without dedicating his time to his creative calling, and sensed that many of his ambitions had been put aside for this other really important community work that he had been doing. It wasn't until 1979, at the age of 49, that he was able to work toward achieving his lifelong dream of documenting the Puerto Rican diaspora. With the support of Dr. Victor Alicea, founder and president of Boricua College, or one of the founders and former and current president of Boricua College in New York, Espada applied for and received a National Endowment for the Humanities grant, NEH, RIP NEH for now. This grant would support the execution of his photo documentary project. On October 1st, 1979, Frank Espada, a Boricua photographer and community organizer, decided that he was going to execute this plan for the, quote, first federally funded documentary for the Puerto Rican community in the United States. And this is part of the archive. And so at Duke University, you can see the archive and you can see all the versions of the grants that he applied for, all the letters that he wrote, and you can see this idea for this project take shape over time. And it's a really beautiful thing to behold. So if you ever got the opportunity to be in like North Carolina, you want to go look at these materials, everything from the application for this grant to the letters of support from different institutions and lack of letter of support from other institutions who would not support him in this project are in that file, as well as his syllabi, the way that he taught photography to others. And so there's some really beautiful text there. So his work, this immense project, was the first of its kind and included over 5,000 photographs and more than 140 interviews. His work as a documentary photographer and longtime community organizer brought a humanizing perspective to a group of people who had long been considered a racial and ethnic scourge in the United States. Espada's work traced modes of survival and thus creatively and ethically represented Puerto Ricans in the United States with dignity and love. The Puerto Rican Diaspora documentary project resulted in an archive that bears witness to the lives and migrations of Puerto Ricans in the, quote, entrails of the monster, to quote Jose Martin, and in the United States. Espada sought to chronicle history and build collections and national networks made clear by the many letters that he wrote to local and national community organizations, universities, museums, and other stakeholders. In this way, his work as a documentary photographer was part of a broader effort to subvert narratives of Puerto Ricans as being paperless people, people that are not represented in the archive, people that are not documented by themselves except for as others, as pathological beings. This is a really important epistemological break, right, in the field of photography, and this is a torch that so many of generations of photographers after, and a handful before, have taken up and done. And it's something that I feel, and many of us feel at CENTRO, that should be taken more seriously, should be cared for with much more attention, which is why we ended up doing this exhibition as part of our move, right, towards thinking seriously about art as intellectual and necessary documentary community practices. In 1985, Frank moved to California with his family and began to work as an arts educator, teaching photography in San Francisco and throughout the Bay Area at the UC Berkeley Extension Program. He continued to work on other social photo documentary projects, including the Youth Environmental Study, the YES project in San Francisco, which documented the impact of HIV/AIDS on youth and grassroots intervention programs. He also did a very similar project as a Puerto Rico project in Guam, the Chamorro Project, which was a photo documentary project undertaken in collaboration with a social historian, Laura Torres, and sociologist, Samuel Betances. That project is super interesting and really beautiful, although there's a lot of details, there's a lot of tea about what ended up happening with that project in Guam with the Chamorro Project. But I think it's important because it fits right in with the theme of Boricuas in relation. The idea that there was a connection between colonial subjects in Puerto Rico and colonial subjects in Guam. How do we make the connection across vast expanses of geography and ocean, right? Geographies and oceans, to contend with a lived experience that is so deeply tied to ours and yet are so far apart we barely get to see them or really understand the living conditions that they're under. Frank Espada passed away on February 16, 2014, and he left a rich and vast archive of work that reflects a lifetime of community activism, photography, and writing rooted in the ethics of care and relationality. And it was in that spirit that I came to the work of Frank Espada, first in 2013, as I was finishing my doctoral degree at UC Berkeley. I remember being introduced to this work, and a professor said to me, Jomaira, you should really look at this book by Frank Espada because it's really talking about some of the things that you're saying, but from this other perspective. And I remember it was like, that's really wonderful, I love this, but I have to finish because I got a job. So like, I put it in a footnote. I was like, and in my next project, I will write about Frank Espada, right? I really want to take up this work. And it wasn't until 2019 that I finally got the opportunity to do that. And in doing that work, I realized that Espada's work, the ethics with which he takes up the work, as someone who studies philosophy a lot, was so important, and it tugged at me consciously and unconsciously, right? What was that? What was the documentation? What does it mean for us to see each other differently than the way that the world sees us, right? And so when I was awarded a grant from the Mellon Foundation, the Diaspora Solidarities Lab Grant in 2022, I knew that it was my ethical duty to take part of that grant and to really sit and help to train graduate students and independent scholars and artists to look at these photographs, to engage with it, but also to listen to, translate and transcribe those 140 plus interviews. I wanted them to become intimate with the history of Puerto Ricans, to think about oral history in this historic context, to think about the way that those incredible, like for me, it is just like, he was so prescient and so brilliant in like bringing a recording device and taking photographs. You can hear him click the photos as people are talking about their lives. And there's so much of that that really can inform the way that we're living in this moment. And those interviews should not be lost to time. They should be accessible to all of us. And pretty soon, probably within the next 6 months, they will be available at CENTRO online for anyone to engage with them. So I made it a goal to give back to this work and to this legacy in the same way that Frank so selflessly gave his talents and passion to the Puerto Rican diaspora. I think many times as academics, we get to study work and we get to take up work, but what can we do to give back to that work? What can we do, right, to make this a reciprocal practice where we can also support the work that we want to be studied and seen in the world? And so, working with a group of students and artists, including Melanie Rodriguez Vasquez, Ariana Costales del Toro, Jafreni Familia, Nicole Hernandez, Stephanie Bravo, Imaida Duran Mariñez, Alana Cordero Montesinos, Melanie Gonzalez, Olivia Ramirez, Jaden Morales, and Julesi Ortiz, all students from Puerto Rico, from Arizona, from California, from Michigan, from Connecticut, from Maryland, from New York City. This entire group came together to work for 3 years, now in the 4th year, on these interviews and to create public projects. The exhibition that is in the Centro Gallery right now is curated by myself as well as Dalina Alvarez Perdomo Alvarez and Wendy Cosme. It was an exhibit that opened in Michigan. It's here in New York City. From here, it will go to the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, and then knock on wood from there to the National Museum of Puerto Rican History and Puerto Rican Art and Culture in Chicago. And for us, this becomes really important because it's the first time that Frank Espada's work is exhibited in such a way in many, many decades. And we also use it as an opportunity to bring in and to put his work in conversation with other artists of many different generations, to talk about the ways that Puerto Rican artists and photographers have long discussed and thought about what it means to engage and to live a life of survival and more, right? The survival of a people is the second part of the title of Frank's book, and I think it becomes so important. So I'm so honored to be able to be here today and to celebrate this with Frank's oldest son, eldest son, I should say, and with a cadre of photographers of multiple generations that were able to know Frank's work, and also take up the legacy of contemporary photography in Puerto Rico. So I'm gonna now read the bios of our panelists and then pass it on. Martin Espada, Esquire, should I say? Has published more than 20 books as a poet, editor, essayist, and translator. His new book of poems, Jailbreak of Sparrows, which by the way is available at the bodega right here. At bodega, I mean the table right outside. Okay. It's available on the corner. Get a 40 in the book. I'm just kidding. You'd be like, yo, I need a black and mild that Jailbreak of Sparrows? Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, excuse me. His new book of, his new book of poems, Jailbreak of Sparrow, was published by NOF in spring 2025. His previous book, Floaters, won the National Book Award for Poetry and a Massachusetts Book Award. Espada has received the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, the Shelley Memorial Award, and the Robert Creeley Award, an Academic of American Poets Fellowship, the Penn Revston Fellowship, a Letras Boricuas Fellowship in the inaugural year. Ask me how I know, because I was a judge, okay? And the Guggenheim Fellowship. A former tenant lawyer with Su Clínica Legal in Greater Boston, Espada is a professor of English at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Erika P. Rodriguez is a Puerto Rican photographer covering the archipelago for international publications for over a decade. Her work meditates on identity and memory, framed by Puerto Rico's socio-political complexities as the oldest colony of the modern world. She's a frequent contributor to the New York Times, and her work has been published in the Washington Post, El País, NPR, The Guardian, Le Monde, and the Wall Street Journal, among others. Rodriguez works to counter the insular Caribbean visual stereotypes and its legacy as quote-unquote paradise. Máximo Colón is a New York-based photographer who studied at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Colón's photography speaks to his concerns of social justice, activism, and cultural expression, which encapsulates a wide range of interests in music, the human condition, and making visible the people of our society who are often marginalized through discrimination and inequality. A number of his photographs form part of the Centro de Puerto Rican archives here at CUNY, and he is currently editing My Upside Down World, Deconstructing Photography, a 5-year digital project encompassing photographs from New York, Puerto Rico, Berlin, Mainz, Paris, Havana, and Toronto. His work can be found in numerous publications, film documentaries, and are part of many private collections. And last but certainly not least, David Gonzalez, a journalist and photographer whose 33-year career at the New York Times spans from the About New York column and covering Central America and the Caribbean, to being a senior writer and visual journalist, as well as longtime co-editor of the Lens blog. His awards include being named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Breaking News as part of Times coverage of a deadly fire in the Bronx. The essay, What Fire Did to the Bronx and Us, was illustrated with his photos. He is a founding member of Los Seis del Sur, a collective of Nuyorican photographers who documented the South Bronx in the late 1980s. More recently, his first show, Urban Devotions, about faith in the city, debuted at Fordham University and will travel to Trinity College in the fall. Please join me in welcoming these incredible
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Oh, this is a little overwhelming. As the saying goes, there are many people to thank. I can only thank some of them. I want to begin with my thanks to Jomaida and everyone at CENTRO. Please give them a hand. Many thanks to David, Máximo, and Erika. We're here to honor my father, but we're also here to honor them, their work, to recognize them. And I also want to thank my father, Frank Espada. He is here, in the room. Trust me, I know. My father did more than 40 solo shows throughout the United States of Puerto Rico, starting with Jacahueros at El Museo del Barrio. But it's very rare today. So please, after we are done, check out the show in the gallery. I'll read 3 poems about my father as photographer and as visionary. This first poem is about the loving vision of Frank Espada. When my father did what he did, some people told him it couldn't be done. There was a famous photographer named Cornel Kaplan who said to him, and I quote, "No one wants to look at pictures of Puerto Ricans, Frank." Now, you know how parents are. My father would tell that story over, and it went something like this. Cornel Kappa, do you know what he said to me? No, what? No one wants to look at pictures of Puerto Ricans, Frank. My father's work is now in the collections of the Smithsonian History Museum, the Smithsonian Art Museum, the National Portrait Gallery, and the Library of Congress. This first poem I'll read actually refers to 8 different photographs. Some of them are in the gallery, some of them are flashing on the screen. Listen, by the way, for the poet in the beret, that's a reference to Jack Alhueros, who was my second father. The title of this poem comes from the 1935 cult horror movie with Peter Lorre. It's absolutely terrible and you must see it. It's a poem called Mad Love. And it begins with an epigraph. No one wants to look at pictures of Puerto Ricans, Frank. Cornell Kappa. My brother said, they harvested his corneas. I imagine the tweezers lifting the corneas from my father's eyes, delicate as the wings of butterflies mounted under glass. I imagine the transplant stitches finer than hair, eyes fluttering awake to the brilliance of an open window. This is not a horror movie. This is not Peter Lorre in Mad Love, the insane and jealous surgeon grafting the hands of a killer onto the forearms of a concert pianist who fumbles with the keys of the piano, flings knives with lethal aim, moonlight sonata swept away by lust for homicide, his wife shrieking. The blind will see, like the captain of the slave ship who turned the ship around. Voices in the room will praise the Lord for the miracle, yet the eyes drinking light through my father's eyes will not see the faces in the lens of his camera, faces of the faceless, waking in the dark room. Not the tomato picker with a sign on his shoulder that says Reagan steals from the poor and gives to the rich. Not the fry cook in his fedora, staring at air as if he knew he would be stomped to death on a stoop for an empty wallet. Not the poet in a beret grinning at the vision of shoes for all the shoeless people on the earth. Not the dancer hearing the piano tell her to spin and spin again. Not the grave digger and his machete, the bandana that keeps the dust of the dead from coating his tongue. Not the union organizer's spirits floating in the smoke of his victory cigar. Not the addict in rehab gazing at herself like a fortune teller gazing at the cards. Not the face half hidden by the star in the Puerto Rican flag, the darkness of his dissident's eye. Now that my father cannot speak, they wait their turn to testify in his defense, witnesses to the mad love that drove him to it. When we look, what do we see? When we look, what do we see? Some people look at tattoos and see gangs. Some people look at Latinos and see the great replacement theory, invasion. My father taught me how to look and how to see, especially injustice. This is a poem from our Brooklyn days. Look at this. My father spoke. Look at this, he said to me. We were walking through an alley from somewhere to somewhere else in Brooklyn. In front of us, a man with white hair and white beard reached into a dumpster, plucked out a bag of potato chips, stuffed his arm up to the elbow in the bag, let it flutter to the pavement at his feet, and shuffled ahead. "Look at this," my father said again. Sometimes he would repeat himself. He walked up behind the white-haired man, called, "Good morning, sir." So the other man wheeled around to see us, shook his hand, and left a $20 bill in the handshake, all without slowing down. We never spoke of it again. The day we left Brooklyn, he drove away so fast he left a stack of his 78s in the closet of the apartment in the project. "Look at this," was all he said, and all he had to say. Look. So, I'm proud to say that I was there for so much of this. Sometimes in my 20s, I was my father's assistant, carrying cameras in the field, recording interviews, logging photographs, helping to hang shows, reading at openings, and above all, sharing his dreams. And that's what this third and final poem is really all about. This is one of the poems that appears in the new book, Jailbreak of Sparrows. My father's practice book. I saw him prowl the streets. Not a cheetah in the nature documentaries he would watch endlessly, saying, "I like animals better than people." Not the first baseman he used to be, leaning at the edge of the infield dirt, but a man with a camera in his hands, searching for the faces of the people he would call our people in the circle of the lens. I trailed him, knobs of knees and elbows, first beard curling around my jawline, camera bag on my shoulder with lenses and rolls of film, watching him crouch and glide, waiting for the long fingers to scroll and snap at me. My signal to stuff another roll in his hand, the whir and click. I heard him boom his greeting on the street, repeating his name like a chant to ward off calamity. Frank Espada, an organizer's incantation on the corner in Brooklyn years ago, handing out leaflets about the rent strike or the picket line. Now he spoke the tongue of a lost island, lost mountains, too big for shopping bags to bring aboard the plane, lost names the cops would confiscate in bags as evidence. Tape recorder on my hip, I heard the soliloquy of the witness, white shirt ghostly in the mirror, blackened by the landlord's fire, the whir and click. And in the circle of my eye, saw the tenants wandering the night, refugees of gasoline and smoke. I was his son, always dubbed El Hijo de Frank. Driving my rented Chevy Impala miles off the map to a labor camp so I could deliver the portrait of Don Pedro, farm worker on a cane, vine of nerves crushed in his spine from too many years stooping for tomatoes on the vine. Everybody in camp gathered to see the print, and a man said, "Es como una pintura." It's like a painting. Don Pedro studied the picture of his face as if he could use it to shave. He nodded and tucked it away. Sage of the labor camp came squeaking across the floor, straw fedora on his head. I would drift away to an island of icicles called Wisconsin. Many years later, my father's compañero Julio, from the days of rent strikes and picket lines, wrote him a check saying, "It's time." His first book at 76. The Puerto Rican Diaspora. The faces, haunted by smoke or aged by labor, rose up to watch him cultivating light and darkness in every face, the veins in his hands entwined. Waiting for the boxes from the printer, my father wrote in his practice book, etching his name on the page as if learning the letters at a desk in Puerto Rico, as if he would be graded for his penmanship, or the teacher in Red Hook, Brooklyn, who squinted at his name and said, "Francisco is too long. Your name is Frank." He would be signing books, first green ink, then blue, then black. He'd loop the letter F, then loop it again, like faces on the subway without eyes or mouths. He would be signing books. Frank, he'd write, Frank Espada, then F. Espada across the page. The birds of his name black in a white sky. He would be signing books. En la lucha, in struggle, for Julio, with many thanks, he would be signing books. He would practice in the practice book, waiting for the boxes from the printer. After the boxes from the printer, after the luminous pages of the first book, after the book signed and shipped to the studios of PBS, or the El Puente Academy for Peace and Justice, after the books handed out to college presidents and poets in barrio pool rooms, after the praise and cards and letters, after the price of the book dropped, after the boxes emptied of books, after the photographs of sunsets taken from the deck did not sell, after the rent spilled like coffee staining the pages of the book, after the bill for the lights glowed like a cigarette burning a hole in the pages of the book, came the letter at Thanksgiving. Dear friends and family, this is a difficult request for obvious reasons. However, the circumstances are, to say the least, dire, for we find it impossible to make it on our only source of income, Social Security. At the moment, we are approaching the edge of bankruptcy. If we cannot raise the necessary funds, we will be dislocated. The rental market is not kind to our kind. An elderly couple, 82, with no solid income, a dog, and a 25-year-old car. This morning, we decided we will not move from here. We determined that doing so may just finish us off. Therefore, we are asking your participation in this rescue operation for a loan of $500. We hope this request does not in any way prejudice our friendship, which we cherish. Frank and Marilyn. 15 months after the checks for the landlord and the power company, I signed another check for my father's cremation at a mortuary by the Pacific. He would never hear about the box labeled Frank Espada at the Smithsonian Art Museum. My fingers at the corners of a print, flipping it over to the site of my own scrawl in pencil on the back. The title, the date, the city. I showed the keeper of the archives, who dangled a pair of white gloves for me. I took a snapshot inside my father's practice book. The face in the snapshot is the face of El Hijo de Frank. Camera bag hanging from my shoulder, where any thief on the street could snatch it away, so oblivious is that face. My glasses, crooked in the circle of the lens, lopsided smile, crooked as my glasses, my face, a page without lines where anyone could write the rest of the story. The crooked letters of his name, a book that would somehow pay the rent. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
I knew your father very well. And actually, in my early 20s, when he did the photographic documentation of the Puerto Rican in Hawaii, and that was the first, he was the one who educated me on the Puerto Ricans in Hawaii, the Puerto Rican community and how they got there. So I just wanted, to share that with you.
Thank you.
We used to call him the Puerto Rican Gregory Peck, by the way.
I've heard things like that too. I'll get me started. All right, we'll be glad to get into a discussion with this audience. I would now like to welcome David Gonzalez, and I want to tell you something. This is spontaneous. I described in the last poem the circumstances. My father dying broke, and I flew to San Francisco to handle the details. And I'd just gotten through with that, at the mortuary, at the cremation. And I was sitting, waiting for my flight to depart San Francisco. And David called me. He said, I have to read something to you. And there he was, reading it to me. And I was sitting on the floor, in the lounge, with the tears pouring down my face. It is a beautiful tribute to my father. You're about to hear it now. So please welcome David Gonzalez.
I really appreciate this, coming out in the middle of the week like this. Seriously, and I'd like to thank Yomaida for inviting us over here to talk about our boy Frank. I wrote this when I was editing the Lens blog. One of the things about editing Lens is I was co-editor. I could print whatever I wanted. And so when Frank died, I could go two ways. I could have called up the obits desk, told them we should run an obit on Frank. I said, no, I'm going to do it myself. Parting Lands, Frank Espada, February 20th, 2014. Can you hear me okay? Yes. I went to El Barrio this week thinking of Frank Espada. On blocks where renovated tenements stood alongside luxury high-rises, I strained to imagine what he had witnessed more than half a century earlier, before anyone thought of this stretch of Manhattan would sit in the crosshairs of gentrification. When it was home to people like him, who came to this frozen city, exiled from the verdant hills of Puerto Rico, when it was among the few havens for the dispossessed. I went to El Barrio to mourn Frank Espada. But Frank was as elusive as the ghosts of El Barrio's past. After a lifetime of raising hell, organizing communities, and taking pictures, he died Sunday night in San Francisco, where he had spent a third of his 83 years imparting his passion for photography to a new generation. His death from a heart problem was unexpected, shocking countless people whose lives he had touched, from university presidents and community activists to photographers and poets. Now, readers of this Lens blog may remember him from a 2009 post about his masterwork, the Puerto Rican Diaspora, a sprawling photographic project that took him on a journey for decades throughout the country as he chronicled the lives of Puerto Ricans. He took it all in, the good, the bad, the joy, the heartbreak. He did not shy away from the grim realities of people who were forced to leave their island to look for better lives. But as Pablo Guzman, former member of the Young Lords Party, told me once, he led with his soul. Quote, I wasn't pre-programmed by some know-nothing editor to bring back more proof as to the miserable lives we were living, Frank told me in 2009. It was to be as loving a document as I could produce. He looked with love along the same streets where other so-called concerned photographers saw only people to be pitied. Then again, he knew what it was like to live in decrepit buildings, going to schools where teachers mangled your name and held you to low expectations. He also knew what it was like to watch others make their name off his community's misery while he had to put aside his artistic dreams on hold to raise 3 children in the housing projects of East New York. Born in Utuado, Puerto Rico in 1930, he relocated to New York in 1939 with his family. He got into photography as a teenager, but joined the Air Force after school. He was traveling on a Greyhound bus from Texas to New York in 1949 when the bus stopped to change drivers in Biloxi. The new driver demanded that he, a brown-skinned Puerto Rican, move to a seat in the back. Well, he was the only one on the bus, his son Martin, a poet, told me this week. My father cursed at the driver, tipped his cap over his eyes, and went to sleep. Shortly thereafter, my father was roused by 2 cops who arrested him and threw him in jail. He spent 7 days on lockup. My father said this was the best week of his life, said Martin, because he figured out what to do with the rest of it. He studied photography in New York on the GI Bill and came under the influence of Gene Smith, we're not worthy, we're not worthy, we're not worthy, and David Heath, both of whom gave him a love for documentary photography. But instead of being able to pursue that, he took a job with an electrical contractor. Quote, a job I despised, for the next 10 years as he provided for his wife, Marilyn, and their 3 children. Not that his life was uneventful. Martin described in one essay how political activism was his father's salvation. He organized rent strikes, voter registration drives, sit-ins of welfare mothers, marches for safe streets and civil rights, said Martin. He was a fierce stump speaker who once shared a podium at a rally with Malcolm X. He went to jail again. He was that most dangerous of creatures, a working-class radical. He worked alongside such revered figures as Evelina Antonetti, the founder of United Bronx Parents, and Jack Agüeros, the poet activist who would later lead El Museo del Barrio. He ran community groups and spoke out in defense of those on society's margins. Quote, the story goes on, but in retrospect, I can say I believe it was all a bloody waste of my creative years, Frank wrote in his introduction to the Puerto Rican diaspora. Although I documented some aspects of the struggle, I was too busy being an organizer and a leader to think of much anything else. When he was 1 year shy of 50, a grant allowed him to finally pursue his book project full-time. Later, he moved to San Francisco and discovered he had a gift for teaching, which he did for, quote, 18 of the best years of his life at UC Berkeley, the extension. He retired in 2005 when a friend gave him the money to finish his book, a documentary project he had dreamed of most of his adult life. Others came to appreciate what many of us had known all along when this Library of Congress acquired an 83 print portfolio, while Duke acquired the archives. Frank, even on the West Coast, was still an inspiration to those of us walking with cameras along the streets of El Barrio, Bushwick of the Bronx, decades after he had blazed the trail. His work showed a master's technique. His words offered a mentor's wisdom. He was a man of definite opinions in politics. A few years ago, myself and 5 other Nuyorican photographers organized ourselves loosely as Los Seis del Sur, exhibiting pictures we took as young men on the crumbling, burning blocks of the South Bronx. Frank was actually the first person to offer encouragement, reminding us not only of the political and social machinations that fueled the borough's destruction, but how far we still needed to go. Quote, we need to raise some holy hell, Frank wrote to us, for we have landed on the bottom and we have stayed there. This week I went to El Barrio to praise Frank Espada. Like Tom Joad, he was everywhere, from the narrow streets slipping into darkness where children wrapped in overcoats waddled behind their mothers, to the thick stone arches along the Park Avenue railroad tracks where arm-sized icicles dangled like daggers. His spirit was there. From Manny Vega's mosaic of Julia de Burgos, the tragic poet born 100 years ago this week, to the Botanica suite with incense. He was there too. Outside of an old political clubhouse on Lexington Avenue, I spied a weathered, peeling mural of a saint adorning the wall. Under a solitary painted star, he had one hand raised. Was it a benediction or a warning? Frank would have said it was both, most likely.
Would like to, can the camera pick this up, or is that okay? Perfect, thank you. I think just one more round of applause. Thank you so much. special to have both of those readings here in this space, in a place that Frank loved so much, a community that he held to such esteem, a community that came out on a Wednesday night to come listen to the memories of this man, but also to celebrate these poets and photographers that have taken up and really extend that legacy so far into the present and the future. So I have a few questions, and then we're going to open it up for questions and comments from the audience as well. And I think some of us have heard a little bit, but I would like to hear a little bit more about each of your relationships with Frank Espada. We know Martin's relationship. So how did you come to know Frank Espada or know of his work? How did you come to know of Espada and his work?
I had been aware of Frank's work, but it really hadn't stuck with me because I went through a 15-year period of my life where I didn't take pictures. I just wrote. And it wasn't until '98 that I kind of got back into it. And in '99, I was in Havana covering Elian, and all I had to read was Grandma. And I was like, yo. And Martin was down there, and that's when we re-met, because we had met at El Puente a few years earlier. And he had books of poetry with him. And that was a hell of a lot more fun to read than Grandma or Juventud Rebelde, yo. And so, I started realizing, looking at his books, oh, I know this photograph. We started talking, oh, it was Father Frank Espada. I'm like, oh, I kind of know that name. And I got to know him when I came back to New York, when he was doing the book. We spoke, and I helped him get some more publicity in a couple of other outlets besides the Times. But we saw him as validating for us what we were doing kind of like naturally. We just didn't know that there were some people that had gone that deeply before us, because for a lot of reasons, Frank wasn't as well known here as he should have been. But that was where I got to know his work and to know the man. And it influenced me greatly because of, like Yoruba said, he led with his heart, and that's a really important thing for us to do as artists. Especially in the world of photography, where they seem to conflate broke down dysfunctional Boricuas with serious photography. All of us here tend to differ on that score. But that's how I got to know Frank's work.
So I didn't know Frank at all. I never met him in person. I knew of his work just by reference by other mentors. And I had only seen his work online until today, actually. I've tried to looked at his work in Puerto Rico. I live in Puerto Rico, and his work is not accessible. So that was part of actually like a wake-up call for me too, when thinking about our own stories, visual stories. And I actually saw his book just a few hours ago, because in Puerto Rico, it's only at the Inter-American University in San Germán. So, yeah, it's a reality, and I think for my generation, at least as someone that grew up in Puerto Rico and lives in Puerto Rico, the kind of disconnection to the access of the stories that are also our stories.
Well, I met Frank back in 1975 when I was hanging out with people from Arawak, people from El Barrio, the young JCs, Julio, Solivan, and I met him then at a conference. And little did I know, that he was a photographer, because he was very reserved. And subsequently, when the book came out, then, I got to know more about him. But by then he was already gone. He was already on the West Coast. But we kind of like travel almost the same kind of path. In one of the pictures that I saw in the book, there was a graffiti on the wall, and it said Roman Lords. And I remember living in Brownsville, Brooklyn in the 60s, that was a gang, and it was a very popular Puerto Rican gang over by Jefferson and Stone. So And in investigating it, I said, damn, we lived in the same neighborhood in the same time, you know. And I found the book very inspiring, you know, because it's kind of like the same path that I've had, you know, in terms of trying to depict our people with dignity and showing their humanity. And he did it very well, and I love his work. And I would have loved to have sat down with him and you know, talk about Eugene Smith and his relationship to Eugene Smith, who I considered, you know, a god of photography. I mean, he was, you know, Eugene Smith was an incredible photographer, and he was mentored by him, my God, you know. So I feel, you know, cheated. And the other thing was, you know, we're both Jíbaros, you know, he comes from Utuado, and I'm coming from Ciales, you know.
First of all, I don't know if anybody's following the baseball playoffs.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going somewhere with this. Game 7, the home runner won the game for the Blue Jays against the Mariners. Was hit by a guy named George Springer. His mother is from Utuado. And this has something to do with the imprint that Frank Espada made on me. Because that's what I noticed. You know, how did I come to know Frank Espada? The story goes that when I was born, he was there. And part of the family folklore was that I was screaming and he picked me up and he held me in one hand like that. He had huge hands. And I'll come back to the hands in a moment. I grew up with an artist activist. His photographs hung on the walls of our apartment in the East New York section of Brooklyn, and therefore hung on the walls of my imagination. They did, and they still do. And the introduction to the art, the introduction to the activism happened very, very early. My father was arrested and disappeared in 1964. He was part of an action with Brooklyn CORE, Congress for Racial Equality, at the 1964 World's Fair in New York. And that was a perfect target for activists because all the corporate pavilions. It's a big corporate smorgasbord, the World's Fair. And so CORE decided, well, why don't we do a sit-in and occupy the Schaefer Beer Pavilion? Schaefer, remember Schaefer Beer? All right, well, Schaefer Beer brought the one beer to have when you're having more than one. So, of course, the perfect target for activists. And my father was the one who figured out how to actually jimmy the lock and get inside the pavilion. And they were all arrested, predictably enough. Unpredictably, however, Rikers Island was full. And when Rikers Island was full, they would send you to a jail on Hart Island, the home of, yes, the world's largest potter's field, 1 million bodies, and a jail. And that's where my father went. He didn't get a phone call. He didn't have a lawyer. He disappeared. He vanished for days and days and days. My mother didn't know where he was. And I concluded that, oh, he must be dead. And so I would sit there holding a photograph of my father, and I would cry every day. It was a ritual. Every day. I'm weeping. And I was doing that one day when he walked through the door. And the first thing I said to him was, I thought you were dead. And he thought that was very funny. And he laughed. My father had gold teeth because all of his teeth were pulled in the Air Force. He had gold teeth. So he looked like a Mexican bandido. Thought it was hilarious. And then he figured, well, you know what? I have to explain to my 7-year-old where I was and why. And so he sat me down and he tried to explain it. Most of it went over my head. But while I was listening to him, I was cradling his hands in my hands, and they were immense. And I thought, oh, he's really back, he's still alive. But all those words were absorbed into me. Flash forward, more influence, the aesthetic side, the poetics, if you want. You heard about how I was my father's assistant in the field. And he would do this, I'm not kidding. He had that in him, by the way. And that was my signal, and I had to know exactly which role he wanted. Slap it in his hand, and then went right from his hand into the camera in one motion, and then because of that motor on the camera. But something else was going on too. Rather than decide to be insulted by that, I started to compose. I was looking over his shoulder. I could see what he saw from the angle, the same angle from which he saw it. I saw with his eye the composition he was creating. And so now as a poet, when I sit down to write, so many of my images are visual, and I'm composing with that eye. And that's a blessing. That's a legacy. You know, and that was and that is present tense, Frank Espada.
So my next question is about yourselves as artists and photographers and poets. So it's a kind of double question. So the first is, how did you become interested in photography? And for Martin, in poetry, you just gave us a little glimpse into how that came to be. And what was the moment that you knew that this was one of your callings? I don't think that this was the only calling. Each of you are so dynamic in the bios, but like, how did you know that this was one of your callings? And then I guess the second part of this is thinking about like, what is Nuyorican photography? What is it? Why do we need it? How is it different, right, than other forms and genres of photography and poetry?
I'll take it. Why not? How to get into photography? I never intended to be a writer or a journalist. I started out as a photographer, to be honest. And then, tried making a living in photography when the Hunt brothers cornered the silver market and you're a CETA artist. It didn't happen. I stopped shooting from 83 to 98. But I got into it because my roommate in college was a photographer, an amateur. And I was less than an amateur at that point. And I would go with him after dinner to the darkroom where he'd process. And the first time I saw a photographic print just show up in the soup, it's like transubstantiation to those of you who are Catholic. It's like, whoa. Time just came back to me floating in the soup. There were two ways to react to that. Yeah, okay. Or, oh my God, I found my life's purpose. And that's where I found it, was doing that. Unfortunately, my old man died right after I graduated from college. I was living at home, and so things happen, cosa de la vida. But I got back to it in 2009, actually in 99 with a passion, 2009 with a serious ass passion. That's all I do now. I don't consider myself a journalist anymore. I mean, I gave half my life to that paper. That's cool. You can find my words. You can find my pictures too. The importance of Nuyorican photography is this. There are like what, 1.5 million of us in the metro area, more or less, give or take, right? We're not a minority. I mean, white people think we are, but we're not a minority. And we also have much greater cultural fluency than they do. Yeah. I mean, that's just facts. And yet, save the applause, because this is where we really get pissed off. We are routinely excluded from both the photographic canon, not the camera, but the canon. We're excluded from it. I mean, you know, Frank Espada, you know, Ben Fernandez, Phil Dante, these are all names you should know, we know them. They're part of our canon. Like Chuck D said, most of our heroes don't appear on those stamps. Most of our photo heroes don't appear on the gallery walls. Trust me. But the other problem is this. I mean, you know, I remember in 1980, me, Louis Morales, and Ralph Ramirez, we went to have dinner with Alex Coleman, who was a curator, former wife of A.D. Coleman, the photo critic. We were excited. We were invited to this salon. We thought, man, we've arrived. And she made a grand pronouncement that street photography was dead. And I'm like, ain't that a bitch? Right when we're getting into it, they tell us it's dead. And that's the same thing that happens with the canon. All of a sudden, work like Frank's is like, oh, we got that from Bruce Davidson. Bruce Davidson in East Harlem, you know, I mean, Bruce tried to get me to write about his work in East Harlem. I had no interest in writing about a guy who photographed Puerto Rican kids in their underwear on East 100th Street. I have zero interest in that. But he kept on saying, you gotta go see East Harlem. And I'm like, dude, I used to cop weed on 101st. What are you gonna show me? My folks met at La Milagrosa. What are you gonna show me? But this is the arrogance of those in the canon, that they tell us who they think we are. And this is the struggle that my generation, our generation, porque somos viejo, I'm 68, this is what we still have to confront. Just like your father had to confront it, he dealt with it by moving to the West Coast and founding, you know, a calling that influenced a ton of people. The reason we need to do this is because, you know, playtime's over. Playtime's over. I'm a Pulitzer finalist, okay? I don't go around throwing that around, but what do you know that I don't? I can do it in 2 languages, yo, and I can do it in the South Bronx. We really want to go there. But they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about how the canon, formed in part by ICP, founded by who? Cornell Kaplan. I mean, it's like, this is built in. ICP, which is built on Puerto Rican ruins on the Lower East Side, Seward Park, y'all. I know cats who were evicted from there when they were 13, and now they're older than me. ICP sits on Puerto Rican sacred ground. You might as well put that on a freaking Indian burial ground. And what do they do with Puerto Rican photographers at ICP? Ricky, what do they do with Puerto Rican photographers at ICP? Nothing. That's right. That's Ricky Flores. And so we're doubling down. We got the work. We got the pictures. And I'm going to be honest. Part of the other problem that we have to do as Puerto Rican photographers is there are a lot of people who like to interpret our work and don't really understand photography. And that's a problem. That's a problem. Because people start reading things into it that we never thought about. I mean, listen, when you make the image, it's out there, people can think about it. What I'm talking about is joyless, abstract analysis. Because our pictures are not sad, yo. Some of them are, because our life is multifaceted. But just as we cannot reduce ourselves to these caricatures promoted by major institutions like Aperture, ICP, you name it, who all know me and you know, were all knocking on my door when I edited the Lens blog, you know. But the thing is, we also have to deal with people looking at our work and not really quite understanding it. And part of the problem is, I'm going to be blunt, some of these folks don't understand our place in the photographic canon or in the history of photography. So how can you tell me a critique if you don't know what's been done before by other people? I mean, now we as photographers, we know that. We all know that as photographers. Who did what before? We have to. It would be nice if some of these folks writing about this knew beyond the immediate, knew beyond what we did in our communities. That's important. But to understand why we do what we do and how we do it, you got to understand that we are actually responding to some individuals, like Stephen Shames, who did the book The Bronx Boys, which shows dysfunctional minors without consent. Yo, I bet he didn't have any releases signed. And he's showing Puerto Rican kids jumping from roof to roof. And Frank, you know, I did another piece with Frank where he talked about that. He talked, I said, those photographers, he was talking about Davidson and Shames, did great harm to our communities because they encouraged these young people to show off for the camera. They're right. I've been happy enough to tell both Shames and Davidson, your work doesn't matter to me. It just don't. It just doesn't, because it just shows us as weak and less than. And you want to talk about survival like Frank, how do we survive? We survive by knowing, one, who the hell we are, and two, hanging out with other people who know they are. Mm-hmm. And then take pictures and write about it, of course.
I want to add to what you're saying, because I'm from a different generation, and actually, you opened a lot of doors for me the first time we met on the first New York Times portfolio review a long time ago. But I will add, even for me, when I was showing, the first time I was like trying to show a portfolio of images made in Puerto Rico, and like the first time I turned my lens to document Puerto Rico as a student. And actually, I think most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time that I sat in portfolio reviews, most editors did not care what I was showing. And I think beyond the canon of who was before is like they didn't care about our history or didn't even know our experiences. And I'll say Nuyorican and Puerto Rico both. So when this was pre-Hurricane Maria, it was always like I was trying to show work and I would have to like give them a history lesson, trying to explain how do I show that we're colonized land without having to be super literal, without showing just the misery, without just showing the visual of the Puerto Rican paradise and whatever they have in mind of what that looks like. And it was really, I mean, to counter the people that I met that supported me, it was like just not a great experience. I had a lot of editors just look at my work, even in reviews, and just be like, and then just stop talking and wouldn't even want to talk about the work. So I think it's something that it's still happening. I would like to think that now it's different, and but I think it's up to us to make those spaces and to make those conversations and to challenge the way that we're represented, the images from the past and the images that are being done currently. So I just want to talk about that.
Well, I became interested in photography when I was about maybe 12 years old. And there was this little ritual in my house where we would look at my father's photo album from Korea. And it was basically 5x7 photographs in black and white. And thinking about it, I think that's where the love for photography came. I wasn't able to pursue it then because I lived in Brownsville, and in Brownsville there was nothing. There was Holy Presentation Church, Holy Presentation on Rockaway. They had a ping pong table, basketball, but there was no art. And it was only when I went to Manhattan Community that I got access to a darkroom, and I started learning basically by the seat of the pants, A guy that used to do the autovisuals said, "Oh, you interested in photography? This is how you do it." And he said, do this. You went to lunch, and when I took out the film was all jacked up as a photographer. It stuck because, you have to roll it in a certain way. So that's how I learned photography. And then at BMCC, I became involved with the Third World Students Coalition for the establishment of Black and Puerto Rican Studies, which didn't exist then. And I was basically doing the photography for the paper. Lillian Jimenez, who's a filmmaker, sister in arms. I mean, we were 18, 19. She signed me up for the paper, right? Then afterwards, I got kicked out of Manhattan community. I got kicked out because I was too busy trying to organize and sitting in the president's office, you know, and calling him to task. So I got kicked out, and eventually I joined a political organization on the west side called El Comité. And there I did work for the paper. And there came a point where I met a mutual friend of ours, Angel Franco, who's a brother to me. He saw me with a camera, and he said, "Oh, you know, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm taking pictures, this and that." And he tells me, "Put a portfolio together, go to visual arts, see this person, and you're gonna get a scholarship." And you gotta remember, this is when nosotros estábamos cañoneando the institutions to let us in, right? And it started because, we were all tracked in high school, to high schools. So I go to visual arts, and I majored in photography. And after about 2.5 years, I didn't want to take another loan because I had taken money from Manhattan community. I didn't want to owe any money. And I said, I don't need a damn paper to tell me I'm an artist. And I just walked out. So I'm a art school dropout. So that was my introduction to photography. But more than anything else, in the beginnings, when I was 17, 18, I didn't have a darkroom or any. I used to do slides, color film. But the emphasis of my photography is to counteract all those things that are portrayed in the media about our community. That we don't care about our kids, that we don't have no ethics, that we don't have no values. So that's what my photography is combating those negative stereotypes, like in West Side Story, que somos ganguitas, Blackboard Jungle, that we're animals. My photography is about uplifting my community. I had a big show. I participated in a big show. The first time that there was a show called Dos Mundos, the Worlds of the Puerto Ricans. Photographers from here and photographers from the island. Well, I decided to put titles on my photographs. And one of the titles made a reviewer irritated. It was a photograph of the Lower East Side by Stanton, and it was all, a car that was all dismantled and everything. And then on the wall it said, Puerto Rico, right? So I decided to call the picture America, Land of Milk and Honey. Milk and honey, not to me, not to the conditions that our community lives in, right? Not to the assaults that we face all the time, right? When we move in, all of a sudden all those services stop, so that they don't pick up the garbage. So they say, oh, those people are, like to live in filth. So anyway, so he got pissed off at me. And mind you, this is the first big show. I mean, this is a big thing. It was here, it was in the Corcoran, the very first time I'm out. And he said, well, the only evidence of social commentary is the work of this young, venomous Puerto Rican. Right? And I said, it didn't bother me because I wasn't looking for a market or anything. I was going to make a point. And I said, I'm sticking my finger in your eye. You got the message. So that's, I didn't exhibit from 78 to 2005, I didn't exhibit, right? But I never stopped taking pictures, okay? I never stopped. The reason why I stopped exhibiting was because you invest money in exhibiting, you buy materials, you buy all these things, and you don't sell. You're a starving artist. I was a starving artist for a while. So it was only in 2005 when Nelida, who worked here as the archivist in the library, said to me, Max, we want to give you a show. That was 2005. So like for 25 years I did exhibit. And I just, you know, I mean, I just keep doing my work. I'm still doing my work, you know?
What was the question? No, I got it. I didn't write poetry in Brooklyn. Growing up in Brooklyn. My father wanted to get us out of the projects. So we left East New York for the land of milk and honey, Valley Stream, Long Island. Ooh. Which at the time was the locus of what was called white flight. Everybody was fleeing New York, right? The African Americans, the Puerto Ricans were coming in, and white ethnics were fleeing the city and landing in the suburbs, Nassau County, Suffolk County, Valley Stream. And there we were, the only Puerto Rican family in Valley Stream. And, trigger warning, I heard the word spick more often than I heard my own name. Sometimes I heard them together. I still have 2 broken teeth in my mouth from those days.
I kept mine.
Yeah. I mean, one of them came out 30 years later, you know. But yeah, I've been punched in the mouth so many times, and one time I had my head rammed into a water fountain in school. And that's also, you know, I was 15 years old, and that's when I wrote my first poem. And parenthetically, my father had nothing to do with that, although he tried. He really didn't know what to do with me in Valley Stream. He tried. My father gave me, he was familiar with one book of poetry. It was the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. He gave me the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam and a Playboy calendar. And I remember I used to actually hide the book of poetry inside the calendar. So my friends wouldn't see me reading poetry. But then I began to write. I made some attempts at doing that, and it went nowhere. I went to the University of Maryland for a year, and I dropped out. I had the cannon aimed at me with one end, you know, because in school we were studying, you know, that I took a poetry course. I was studying Stevens and Pound and Eliot, and, you know, absolutely no mirror there at all. I was writing poems in a creative writing class with the immortal Peter Van Egmond, who told me that my work was hostile and aggressive. Some of this is starting to have an echo, right? So I dropped out, and I was well on my way to becoming a professional dishwasher. And then somebody showed up at the door and showed me an alternative. His name was Luis Garden Acosta.
Oh my God.
Luis.
Puente.
Luis Garden Acosta was the co-founder of El Puente over there in Brooklyn. And he was a political protege of my father's. I met Luis when he was asleep on our couch in Brooklyn. And I woke him up, and to keep me quiet, he read me a passage from Macbeth. I don't know why. But Luis was always teaching, always teaching, always teaching. He was a great natural teacher. And he showed up to visit one day. I was 20 years old. And he had a book with him. He handed me the book. And he knew I had been writing poetry and I had stopped. And Luis said to me, "You are going to be a poet." Okay. I grunted at him. Then I took the book. It was called Latin American Revolutionary Poetry. It was edited by a Nuyorican. His name was Roberto Marquez. I opened the book, and the first poem I saw was Puerto Rican Obituary by Pedro Diaz. But I also saw the work of Ernesto Cardenal of Nicaragua in 0 Hour, right? All about the Somoza dynasty and the Sandinista resistance. I saw the work of the great Afro-Cuban poet Nicolas Guillen. I saw the work of the murdered revolutionary from El Salvador, Roque Dalton. And all of a sudden, it was as if I heard a noise and turned around and there was a demonstration. Blocks and blocks and blocks behind me. I came from a tradition that I never knew, that was kept from me. I came from a history that I never knew, that was kept from me. And I started writing again. And I never looked back more than 20 books later. Okay, that's how it works. People talk about influence all the time, and they want me to say, "Oh, yes, Walt Whitman, Pablo Neruda." Okay, my influences are at my elbow. My influences, Frank Espada, Jack Agüeros, Luis Carden Acosta, Nuyorican, who never got credit for their influence on me unless I said it out loud, and never got credit for their own work. As far as what Nuyorican photography means to me, I'm sure you heard, I don't read that poem in public. It's too hard. Because what I'm documenting and what I'm expressing in that poem is the death of an artist who also happened to be my father. For me, Nuyorican poetry was and remains a matter of life and death. And if we do not support our artists, our photographers, right here, all right, what happens to our writers, our artists, our photographers if they don't have our support? They die. Books die, writers die, artists die, musicians die, they die. I watched my father die. And we're here to pay tribute to him tonight, and that's moving me. I'm holding back tears, but it's really important to keep that in focus. This here is a matter of life and death for the artists and for the community, both.
I have so many more questions, but I also know that this audience is full of questions and comments and wanting to share experiences. So I do want to open up the floor to that. If we don't have any immediate ones, I can ask a question, but we got one. Boom. We got a live one, baby. We got a live one. You pass the mic? Okay, Kimberly's gonna pass the mic. I'll pass this one immediately, and then Kimberly can pass it out. Or you can.
Thank you. Thanks for the panelists. This is a great event. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for sharing your stories with us. My question is specific to you, Martin. I know we're close friends, and I know about that we share history in Brooklyn, and we're both up from there, along with Máximo as well. So, but you and I, we work together, we talk together, we worked together at Massachusetts. While you were at UMass and I was at Hampshire College. So the question though, now in the perspective of both me knowing you and now in light of this with your dad's work, can you offer perhaps more reflections on the linkage between you being your dad's assistant And perhaps those were the days that you became a poet, and seeing that poem that you shared with us, how to look. And so is your poetry looking, documenting, witnessing, a voice for justice, a voice for history, and whether there's a parallel with what your father was doing on the visual side, that you're doing on the poetic side?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's not a coincidence that my father's photographs appear on at least 10 or 12 book covers, because that makes sense to me. The book is a book called Floaters that I published in 2021. And there's, yeah, that's the book that got the National Book Award. The first Puerto Rican, by the way, to win the National Book Award was William Carlos Williams in 1950, and no one knew he was Puerto Rican.
He kept it on the wraps.
And the next Puerto Rican to win the National Book Award was me. So there you are. But there's a photograph on the cover of that book, and it's a photograph by my father of a migrant worker, a mushroom worker in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, named Angel Luis Jimenez. And I chose that photograph very deliberately. It was a photograph of a migrant by a migrant. And the title poem of the book is about two Salvadoran migrants who drowned crossing the Rio Grande. And that was the connection that I was making. So there's that relationship is still very much a living thing. I cannot think of myself as a poet without my father being there. And this is, as I said, we didn't have a library of poetry. We had one book, one calendar. But I was the first one in my family to get a college degree. So when I started writing poetry, it was not something that my family could, what are you doing? What? In fact, there was some conflicts because of some of what I wrote, not realizing that I couldn't simply take the stories being told around the table and put them in the poems. And my father once said, and this is a direct quote, "That never happened, and besides, you should wait till people are dead to write things like that." Well, now he's dead. Writing things like that. But what I didn't realize at the time is what a profound effect I had on him. You know, we've been talking about it like it was all one-way traffic, and I discovered it wasn't. You know, I told that story earlier about him being arrested and disappearing when I was 7 years old, 1964. So he and I had some hard words about some of the things I had written. And, we stayed away from that for a while. And then in 1994, after I came to UMass, I organized an exhibit for my father. It was one of the last ones. It was this next to last exhibit he did during his lifetime. And he came to UMass. We had a big show in the gallery. And I had written a poem, and it was a poem all about what happened when I was 7. And I'm holding the poem like this. I'm saying, I've written something here. And I want to read it for this opening, but I really, really think you should see it first. And he went all First Amendment on me. Oh no, you have the absolute right to say whatever it is you want to say at any time. This was not true. But that was the position he was taking, anti-censorship. And I said, well, that's I appreciate that, but I really think you should read this first. So he took it, little poem, 3/4 of a page. And keep in mind, my father was 6'4", making him the tallest Puerto Rican in the world. The Puerto Rican Gregory Peck. And he was taller than me. So he's reading this poem. And then he lurched forward into my arms with his head on my shoulder, sobbing. I had no idea I had this effect on him. And I'm holding him there, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Because we have to talk to that audience in 2 minutes. And so I had to calm him down. And I'm seeing a side of him that I had never seen before. I once asked my mother, did you ever see my father cry? She saw him cry once when he was watching the funeral of John F. Kennedy on TV. So you got to go back to 1963 to find the precedent. So this was shocking. I calmed him down, straighten his suit, all right, go. But then I had to read the poem again at the opening, which I did, and he cried again. And then from time to time, when we would talk about my poetry, he'd say, well, I've only read a couple at a time. And one time he said, I only read 2 and 3, and I put it away. And I said, oh, what's the matter? I said, your eyes giving you trouble again? No, I keep crying. And this was the effect. So this is the effect we had on each other. We made each other cry in the best sense. And if he were here, he would be so proud. And not it wouldn't necessarily be all about me either. He would be proud of you. Because it was all about the community in the end of the day. Imagine someone who could say, totally without irony, use the phrase, our people. That's what he did. And to be the son of a famous father, to be el hijo de Fran. I'm 68, and I'm still el hijo de Fran. And you can resist that, or you can embrace it. And I've chosen to embrace it. And I hope that's coming across.
Yes.
More questions or comments? I think we should take 2 or 3 at the same time, and it'll be the last one, and then we can go to this reception. We also want to make sure you see the exhibition and the picadera también, because la comida está enfriar. So we'll take a few questions at a time, and we can gather them and then answer them.
Hi everyone, good evening. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Is it on? Is that on? Hold on. Oh,
No.
sorry.
It's okay. I think I can speak loud enough.
No, I got you. We're going to catch it on the camera. Here.
Oh, I got you.
Thank you.
You gotta sign a release.
1, 2, 1, 2. Hi everyone, good evening. Good evening to all the wonderful artists up front. My name is Hector Rivera. I'm a Puerto Rican in exile. I live in California right now, but I'm from out here in New York. So I'm super excited to be here. Just the other day, I was talking to a friend who was born in California, Gardena, that area. And we were talking about, she showed me pictures of Frank Espada, and I was like, wait, some of them look familiar, because I remember seeing books by Martin Espada. So I was like, wait, these photos look familiar. And we found out that Mr. Espada, Frank Espada, came to Long Beach to document Boricuas in Long Beach, which is where I'm living now. So we got all excited, like, oh my gosh. And we started dreaming up what we need to do is find some current photographers like you all and do this exhibit out in California. That would be great. And then all of a sudden we see in the Centro page that this is already happening. And so I wound up coming from California out here, and my question is a real simple question, and it's a real selfish question in some ways. My question is, if and when I find the money to fly you all out there, would you be interested in having this exhibit travel to California? That's it, that's my question.
Has to be first class.
Maybe I have enough points on my JetBlue card.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Andreina. I'm an activist from Connecticut. So I have kind of like a two-part question. So what advice do you have for youth organizers looking to make a breakthrough in journalism? And also, as someone who's also a poet and I think like an intersectional artist, how can I help my parents embrace who I already am? I've had difficulties with that.
Yeah. Any other question? A third one? Over here? Oh, and one over here too. So four, we could just think you want to catch them all. Gotta catch them all. Okay, yeah.
Hi, my name is Becca Aubrey, and I'm a PhD student at the CUNY Graduate Center.
Give it up.
And I just want a really simple question. I want to know what y'all's favorite memories are of Frank, and those that didn't know him personally. Like, what's your favorite thing that you ran into, like an interesting fact about him that you would like people to know?
I guess I'll start.
Oh, we have one more.
Oh,
One last one.
are we right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's
Yeah. I'm writing them down so we don't forget.
Okay.
Yeah,
So my question is actually kind of related. In the interest of those of us who nerd out over editing and photo editing or poem editing generally, right? And in the interest of those who are just enjoying the work for what it is, the community factor, etc. Which photograph of Frank's is your personal favorite? And whether it is because of the technique or because of how it made you feel, what is your favorite thing about that photo?
So support, help, and activism with organizing, and also telling your parent that you're an artist in these times. Okay. Memories, a memory of a preferred memory, a favorite memory, or fun fact about Frank, and then maybe do you have a favorite photograph of his? And also the book, the actual book, the Puerto Rican Diaspora Themes and the Survival of People. My personal copy is floating around. Okay, it's going around the room. Pero if it goes missing,
Nobody leaves the room.
okay. I might be the directora, but I know how to fight. I'll see you outside. Okay, but let's go with this question. We'll catch them all. Yes.
Well, my thing with Frank is, I met him back, like I said, back in '75. He didn't divulge anything about photography. My favorite thing about Frank is this whole question of his relationship with Eugene Smith. And not only that, the quality and the intensity and the beauty of his fucking photographs.
The prints. Well, this is the thing, about Frank's work. Just like Hiram Maristani, he was a consummate technician. And I think, I have one picture of Frank's hanging in my living room. I love that picture. It's the Pentecostal church next to Jaime's Meat Market.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the cover of the book right there.
Yeah, that's hanging in my living room. I love that as a photograph, period. It's a great photograph. That's the other thing, you got to think about composition and what it means.
You know, the picture has to tell the story. It doesn't matter how many words you put under the picture. If the picture don't tell the story, you got to go back to the drawing board. And to be honest, there's a lot of that going around now. You know, as I call it, photographs you got to explain.
No, forget it.
Yep. If you got to explain the photograph, you might want to go back to the drawing board to rethink your career choices. Because it's all about the visual, the intellectual, and the emotional. And those are all without words, you know. Frank's work taught me that. One of my favorite pictures is a rough one. The guy whose kid died standing on the corner in East New York. That still knocks the breath out of me. I think an important lesson that we have from Frank, and I've taken it to heart, I could give a crap about what the mainstream thinks about my work. I really don't care. They all know me. I mean, they know me at ICP, they know me at Aperture, they can spell my name in a book introduction. I don't know how you could do that. Just look at my byline in the New York Times back in the day. You can see it every damn day almost. I don't care. I don't need them to tell me that my work is good. I know my work is good. And that's where you have to start, with you. You don't need permission from ICP or some of these people will tell you that your work doesn't matter, or Cornell Kappa, who's revered in certain circles, telling you who wants to look at pictures of Puerto Ricans. Well, obviously, a bunch of y'all here. I mean, my work is rooted in my relationship to my community, period, full stop. That's it. It all comes from the bottom up, just like when I was just doing words. I'm a street reporter. I will go to the street and talk to people. That's how you learn stuff. But it's all from the bottom up. Again, something I see in some contemporary Latin art circles, it's all from the top down. It's all from the top down. It is abstract, it is obtuse, it is verbose. That's not photography for me. And this whole thing with the lens-based art. Yo, if I don't have a lens on my camera, I can't do art, okay? So I don't know, all these things that we're doing just to try to justify what we do. What we do is simple. What we do is kind of simple. Actually, it's hard. Because people think it's easy because you can push a button. You have no idea what goes on in my head, or Max's, or Erika's, when we decide to take a picture. This is not an accident. We take pictures with intent. I don't take pictures from my hip anymore. I raise my camera to my eye. I engage the person I'm talking to. Those are all really important things to keep it rooted in people. We can tell these same stories, and much better, if we present them in ways that people who do not have specialized degrees can understand the damn work. Because ultimately, that's what it's about for me, is people understanding what I do and what I do relative to my various communities, whether it's the South Bronx, Boricuas, graffiti writers, or DJs, or whatever, or religion, which is another big aspect of my work. It all stems organically from the ground up. And if I didn't do that, I would be lost. And so that for me is the most important thing. And you will talk about advice for young people, or young photographers, or new photographers, I should say, because some people get to it later on. You gotta know who you are, and only you can figure that out. It took me a long time. And you also gotta forget about some of the voices that are in your own head telling you really can't do this, and that's nonsense. You should have seen when we started this. We could barely afford a 35mm third grade camera with a lens that's like a Coke bottle. And it was a 50. All of us learned how to shoot with a 50 because we couldn't afford anything else. And actually, that's not a bad discipline to have, to be honest. But we were pissed because all our friends had Leicas and Hasselblads, and I had a camera I called the government cheese of cameras. That's what I could afford.
The Pentax 100.
I eventually got the MX, but no, the first was a Petrie. Trust me, nobody heard of that.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
But we do this because we have to do it. I don't want to sound corny or dramatic, but I do pictures every day, yo. I work on photographs every day. I can do it on my phone. I got all kinds of apps. I got access to my archives in the cloud. But the important thing for me is none of that could have any meaning if I didn't have some sort of connection to the community. And that's what made my journalism different also, was that, I didn't need to talk to politicians or analysts. Just hit the streets, yo. You can find out, I mean, you do talk to politicians and analysts, but you just don't value their word over the people living through it, that's all. But those are all things that I think, I brought to my writing, but now I'm bringing it back to my photography, and somebody like Frank played a major role in making us realize, yo, just do you. I don't need the photo establishment to pat me on the back, because they'll find another flavor next year. That's all. So I know with my people, it's out there. That's all I want to do is take pictures. And I'll take it whether or not people are going to look at them, although it kind of defeats the purpose. Nobody looks at them. But I'm going to take it. It's like an imperative for me. For I suspect the other folks here too.
I want to say the question about
Go ahead.
the question that we had back here in the room about convincing your parents. You really have to follow your heart. You have to follow your heart because, you're making your way. You're making your own life, and you have to follow your heart. And I know, our parents they told me the same thing. How are you going to eat being a photographer? They're very practical, But you have to follow your heart and figure out how you're going to do it, Figure out how you're going to do it. I mean, I built dark rooms. I did silk screening T-shirts. I did a whole bunch of things to keep doing my photography, And I had to get a real job because I had a family then, So I did that, but I still kept taking pictures.
I wanted to answer the question about Frank, which I never got to know in life. And I'll say two things. Seeing the book that's going around, it's going around because I was looking at it earlier and I got it down from her office. And one thing that really stuck out to me, and because I'm comparing it to the work that I do, is that in most of the images, people are smiling to the camera, so people are very aware that they're being photographed. And I have a lot of friends that joke, people that are not in photographers, that are always like, people in your pictures are always so serious. And that's like something I just do. I don't understand why, but I've questioned myself why I do it a lot. And I think looking at his book really touched me because it's just a different relationship of how he wants the people to be represented and to have just a different relationship when you read the images, and that really stood out to me. And second, I say that my favorite image that I saw today, and it's outside, it's the grandmother with the baby.
Mine too.
I really loved it. It's such a dental moment of generation. I was like, I wonder where this was taken. It looks like Puerto Rico, and then I saw the caption in the slide, and it's in Toquillo, which doesn't exist anymore. It was wiped out to build La Milla de Oro, and it really it just went into another layer of thinking, these images when they were done, when this barrio existed, and it doesn't anymore, and where many of the people that were from Toquillo ended up in the diaspora here in New York, or are in the other barrios in El G8, in El Caño Martín Peña. So, I don't know, I've been with my work, and I said this earlier a lot, that I feel like I don't want to make images anymore because I want to focus more on the work that has already been done. Because I look at Frank's work and I look at the work of other photographers and I'm like, how did I not know this before? How did I not see this before? And it's hard to access it. A lot of it's on archives, it's like, or if there are books, the few books that are out there are harder to get. So you have to really go out of your way or have the privilege to have access to our stories. And that's something that stays with me a lot, that I've been thinking a lot about, I would prefer, or maybe this is just my existential crisis now, of to put my time into making sure that we don't lose these archives and the way that we are photographing ourselves and telling our own stories for the future.
Well, When people ask me about how to get started, when I was asked so many times to give my advice to young poets that ultimately I wrote a poem called Advice to Young Poets, and the whole poem reads, "Never pretend to be a unicorn by sticking a plunger on your head." And first of all, one of my students actually did that. And she had to go to the emergency room, have it removed, Vaseline. What I'm getting at with that colorful image can be summarized by quoting something from Shakespeare. Yeah, I'm an English professor. "This above all, to thine own self be true." That's what we've been talking about. To thine own self be true. And yourself is intimately connected to a collective, to a community, to a larger self. So it's self in the broadest definition of that word. To thine own self be true. To your own identity, to your own experience, to your own community, be true. Now, having said that, I think it's also important to flag something that David, who was there only a moment ago, there he is, brought up when he talked about my father as a printmaker, right? Many major photographers do not do their own printing, right? My father did it all. Somebody called him a one-man band. He was what they used to call a master printmaker. And so when you look at his prints, they pop. There's a depth. There's the old school ways, the silver gelatin prints. Right? So what we've been talking about can be boiled down to one word: craft. So for all that we talk about everything else, about being Boricua, and so on, we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't first and foremost about craft, about doing it right and doing it well. And you know what? We can do it just as anyone else can do it, right?
And better.
And better, and better, and better. In terms of my favorite memory of my father, my favorite photograph of my father. Okay, you got an hour. First of all, in terms of my favorite memories, they don't have anything to do with photography. You know, let me put it this way. I live in Western Massachusetts, and I actually subscribe to the MLB package, so I could watch a season of the Mets. And it wasn't about the Mets, as we now know. It was about my father. My father took me to my first baseball game when I was 5 years old, in the Polo Grounds, in 1962. I used to sit on the couch and watch that black and white TV, right? My father, the Mets game. My father was a baseball player. My father was a pitcher. So I learned how to watch baseball from the perspective of the mound and his running commentaries, but it was mostly about that. I don't know, it sounds cliche, father and son baseball, but that was real. That was very real. You know, the time I spent with him on the road. Because on the road, you start sharing secrets. You start saying things you wouldn't otherwise say. There are things he said to me that I would never share, that I would never say to anyone else, that I'm not going to tell you, right? But that kind of closeness between a father and a son is exceptionally rare. and I can say that from both points of view, both angles. My favorite photographs, it's hard to single them down to one. Some of it has to do with the subject. I mentioned earlier that Jack Agüeros was my second father, right? Poet, playwright, essayist, and the director of El Museo del Barrio. Jack, I wrote 2 elegies for Jack. I miss him so much. My father did 4 portraits of Jack, and to my knowledge, that was more than anyone else. He did 4 portraits of Jack Agüeros, right? And Jack had what somebody called that killer smile.
Yep.
I think it was you, actually.
It was. Your pop wasn't behind either.
So, and some of the photographs, I have to understand, I was standing right outside the frame. I was there, and I'm the last survivor who can say that. I was standing right there. So there's a way, of course I favor that photograph because I was there. Sometimes I'm the one with the equipment, having the interview with the person you see. All right, but if I had to pick one, and apparently I do. Es tu culpa. I'm going to pick one. There's a photograph that my father gave a name, and then later on he changed the name. Originally, this photograph, which hangs above the couch in my living room, it's called Old Man in a Doorway, East New York, 1965. That's what, 1964. That's how I originally encountered that photograph, and it is a beautiful composition of a Puerto Rican man in a fedora, straw fedora. I think not a straw fedora, but a fedora. And he's stooped in a doorway. As a composition, again, as we heard, the photograph has to stand on its own. You won't know from that photograph what I'm about to tell you. So, when I was 9, I went to my first demonstration. There was a man by the name of Agropino Bonillo. He was a short order cook. He had 10 kids. He was walking home one night on Alabama Avenue when he was surrounded by addicts who demanded money. When he didn't have any money to give, they knocked him down and they kicked him to death. My father co-organized a march and a vigil, candlelight vigil. And so my father went to the head of the march because he was the organizer, the leader, leaving my mother with me and my brother and sister at the back. And I remember, I was 9, it was raining that night. We had candles. We lit the candles. The candles kept sputtering out because of the rain. And we would light the candles again, and again they would sputter out, and people would light them again. And we would huddle in groups, small groups, to light the candles and then cover them with our hands to keep the flame alive. And so we began to march down Alabama Avenue. And at first, there was just 50, 75 people. And as we marched and night fell, we could see one by one people coming out of the buildings on either side of the street with candles. And then we couldn't see anything except the light from the candles themselves, bobbing, bobbing down those steps and into the street in front of us. And at first it was a trickle, and then it became a flood. More and more and more and more, and what started out as 50 or 75 people became, I heard, 3,000. That's what I heard. And as we marched, this image came into my head, the moon shattering. The moon shatters on Alabama Avenue, and one day I would write a poem with that name. And we got finally to the place we were going. There was a wooden box on the stoop where he had died. You could still see the blood stains, and people were throwing money into the boxes, so people who had nothing, throwing money into the box. And I listened from there to my father and others speak. That man, Agrupino Bonillo, was the man in the photograph. My father didn't know his name when he photographed that man. It turned out that was the man, the same man for whom he organized his candlelight march and vigil after his murder. And that photograph, of all his photographs, is the one that hangs in my living room behind the couch. Because what it says is everything to me about my father as an artist and an activist. The activist side, of course, the leader, the community organizer, that came out in the candlelight march and vigil in the name of Agrupino Bonillo. But he didn't know who he was when he snapped that shot. And it didn't matter, because that was the face for him of the barrio at that moment. And he was going to bring us the dignity and the humanity in that face, which so many have denied in the years since. And that's what we're up against ultimately. That's what you've heard from everybody here about what we're doing. This is about preserving our dignity in the face of indignity. This is about restoring our humanity in the face of dehumanization. Right? They want to call us migrants? Let them. Right? There is no migrant crime wave. The only migrant crime wave is the crimes being perpetrated against migrants, including Puerto Ricans, to this day. My father used to say, the newest immigrant is the Puerto Rican who got here yesterday. We have to keep that in mind in this day and age with so much hate being spilled out, right? We stand in solidarity with those people. And we stand in solidarity with those people because there were photographers, there were artists like my father who made sure that that's what we would do today. He brought me, and I think all of us, that great gift.
That portrait of Agrupino is also in that book. It's really incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I want to thank Martin, Máximo, Erika, David for being here, for joining us in this celebration of the work of Frank Espada, but also celebrating the legacy of Puerto Rican and Nuyorican photography and the ways that we care about one another, especially in a time where people are talking about empathy as a sin, something that we know that it is not. It is a necessary part of human relationality. I also want to thank the CENTRO team that has been working tirelessly to bring this together. If you haven't noticed, CENTRO está nuevo. To the media team, to the arts and culture team, to the comms team, to our outreach team, to the press, as well as to the research and operations, because in operations no hay nada. Ese que está ahí corta los cheques ahí atrás. So we'll talk to him. And then this, the exhibition itself, I just want to talk about the sponsorship for it. So the exhibition itself was made possible through a higher learning grant of the Mellon Foundation for the Diaspora Solidarity Lab, which I lead with Dr. Jessica Marie Johnson and Tatiana Eshelman, who's here somewhere in the corner. Tatiana, raise your arm. Thank you, Tatiana. And then also made possible through the Mellon Rooted and Relational grant through the presidential initiatives, which I think is super special that this foundation led by a Black woman poet and scholar decided that Puerto Rico was deserving of a pride of place and deserved the kind of support, right? So I'm really excited and thankful that they've been so deeply reaching into Puerto Rico and the diaspora to support these kinds of projects. And finally, I want to thank all of you. All of you make this possible. When we have our community come together in this kind of way, we know that we're doing something that is important to you, and we always want to be responsive and accountable to our community in El Barrio and beyond. So thank you so much. We're so appreciative. You have no idea. It's so special to us when we can open the doors for Centro, and you know, now we're officially here in El Barrio. Now we're no longer split between two places. Estamos aquí. Ahora a comer and to see art, y se tiene que ir como las 9. Okay, bye.
No me vete.